good, mate. How are you?
Absolutely.
These things take time.
It's fine.
Right.
My son's piece.
Oh,
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Something you want.
all right,
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, no, that's good that you've got it. You know.
we are going live on the internet and also,
Calcutta.
yeah, in Calcutta. I've been to Calcutta. No, it's called, it's spelled differently. It was Calcutta and then but now it's called Calcutta. It's slightly different. Anyway, greetings everyone. Would you like to join me in the opening kind of kid? So, just for everybody online, we had our Waitai Coastal-Burwood-Linwood Community Board information session on the coastal hazards adaptation planning, lessons learned, and where to next. We did have something else scheduled, but staff are unwell. So we'll just start with apologies. So an apology for absence from Greg Mitchell, apologies for lateness from Alex Hewson, apology for early departure from Kelly Barber. Do we have any other apologies? I don't believe I've received any others.
I've just, noted it. There was an email from Celeste asking if she can zoom into the meeting. I've only just sent it, so I haven't responded. I'm happy to try and send her the link.
Okay, well, she's welcome to if she wants to. So apologies for lateness from Councillor Donovan. Someone else move those be accepted. I don't need to. I always forget because it's an information session, not a meeting. All right, so those are just noted. All right, so now we have Jane, Sarah, and Jessica here to talk to us about lessons learned.
Is it a turn on or are they already on?
Turn on the person with the sound waves coming.
Oh, Kia ora koutou, I'm Jane Morgan, leader Coastal Hazards Adaptation Planning. I think most of you before, and I'll just ask my team to introduce themselves.
Kia ora koutou, Sarah Parlin, Senior Adaptation Advisor in Jane's team.
Kia ora koutou, for Jess Weston, Tukwingwa.
So we're here today to talk to you about, give you a little brief update at the start about where we're at and what we're working on at the moment, go through some of the lessons we've learned in our first pilot process of adaptation planning in Whakaropo, Rotorutan Harbour, and then Port Levy, Kokorowata. But we've mostly really wanted to engage with you today about our next adaptation area and get some feedback from you about the options so we can put that into the mix before we seek a decision. But I just wanted to start by saying, acknowledging the support of this board for the process. So a number of you are on the Coastal Hazards Working Group, and also you have supported the first coastal panel through allowing one of your members to be on the coastal panel. So I think it's been a real advantage to us to have somebody sort of already here who's participated in the process, and Jo is probably one of the most reliable attendees, I believe, we had. So given it wasn't her community that she was working in, I think that was really it's fantastic. So we'll crack into the next slide. We do have it, yes, great. So as you will all know, hopefully, our first adaptation plan was approved by Council on the 4th of March. We're not going to go into the process behind developing that, but essentially it was led by the Coastal Panel, which is the group of community and runanga reps, and they made a recommendation to Council, and Council made the final decision. So that occurred earlier this year. We're going to be talking to you today about the lessons learned process and where to next. But in the interim, we are doing some work around a couple of things. One is there's a number of pieces of technical work that we are kicking off. They're really around monitoring. I know that some of you have an interest in signals and triggers and thresholds. So, and for that to happen, we really need to be collecting a lot more data sets. So there's a whole lot of things like June monitoring and things like that going on, and some gap filling assessment work as well. And then at the end of delivery of all of those pieces of work, we will be doing making, as we always do, some effort to make sure that the outcomes of the science are understandable and accessible to communities. We're also, one of the lessons learned that Jess will cover off in a minute was that some of the concepts behind adaptation planning are difficult for communities to engage with. We work in deep uncertainty that leads to some different ways of working. And so we're also investing some time in what's called in our space building adaptive capacity. So that's about providing opportunities for the community to engage with some of these issues, understand the hazards, become more literate in some of the sort of concepts that sit behind adaptation planning. We also were lucky enough to get some funds during the last LTP, so we are going to be accelerating the program through additional resourcing, and we're doing quite a lot of work around that. Again, part of that is about bolstering our monitoring and reporting. Our plans are based on signals and triggers and thresholds. We don't currently have a framework, so that's one of the things we're going to be delivering. And I've just put a little pop in here for the for your awareness. There's a big international conference later this year on adaptation in Christchurch. To be attended by the UN, and a number of council staff are involved with that. So I just wanted to give you a bit of an overview. And I'll hand to Jess now for the lessons learned.
Great, thanks, Jane. So adaptation planning is an intensive process of co-creation. We spent around 40 hours doing workshops with the specialist and technical advisory group who supported us. We had around 20 coastal panel meetings. We had separate hui at several points with Tururunanga or Kokorarata and Ngāti Wheki. We also had broader community engagement during that time. We attended like Autumn Bradley Fair, things like that, the Governor's Bay Fete. And so because it is an intensive process of co-creation, the first adaptation plan took around 2 years to complete. As Jane mentioned, we received some additional funds through the LTP process, and also just to mention that we work within the confines of our coastal adaptation framework, and we don't intend on amending or going and reconsulting on the coastal adaptation framework in advance of any central government directions. So all the lessons learnt process changes all fit within the coastal adaptation framework. The lessons learned also has been identified through surveys. We surveyed the coastal panel, the specialist technical and advisory group, the chat team and the independent chair. And then we've also it's all through feedback that we've heard and workshops with staff. So yeah, we're just keen to hear at the end of the presentation today your reflections on the process so we can have a bit of discussion at the end. Firstly, what worked well? We had all but one person from the coastal panel agree that it was a co-creation process and it was open and transparent, and that there weren't it wasn't seen to have predetermined outcomes. So we thought that was really important and that that worked well. Off the back of that, we also had all of the panel members reported feeling comfortable with the preferred pathways that were in the plan at the end. And we also had the majority of specialists and technical advisory of the group say that they would be happy to participate again. So we felt that that was positive. The key areas of improvement are broken down into three main areas: the chat program itself, the plan itself, and then broader coastal panel operations. The feedback that we received again and again was that the process as a whole took too long. So going back to the fact that it took 2 years, it's a long time for people to be engaged in a process like that. So we will be looking at how we can adopt a flexible approach to asset planning. So it may look like we do planning by asset class, by network, or by a mix of that. It will largely depend on where we end up going next, which Sarah will talk to. We may also undertake planning in more than one area at a time, or more densely developed area. We'll talk about that soon.
Could you explain the asset?
Yeah, I think that does. Yeah, so if you have a look at our plan at the moment, we've basically done adaptation pathways by asset. So there's an adaptation pathway for toilets, for roads, for parks, for community facilities. And so what we're looking at here is potentially in the future, we could do an adaptation plan for all toilets in the area rather than for each one. We could do it by network. So you could take a main arterial road and all the roads that come off that and have one adaptation pathway for that network. And then we could also look at by area. So other places, for example, Auckland, they've lifted their process up and taken large chunks of coastline and said this area here as a whole would be an area we might protect, retreat from, etc. The challenges with that, and these are things that Sarah's working through at the moment, that doesn't provide the level of detail necessarily, that last example at the by area, for asset planners necessarily to make those decisions within that. So this is the bit around the mock process. We're needing to really test how well that change could occur.
Is it just council assets, you're talking houses?
No, so the adaptation framework set our process, and we are focused on public assets at the moment. We're waiting for central government direction essentially on what the process would be for any kind of compensation for private properties if there are different decisions that need to be made, and the MFE National Adaptation Framework is coming out later this year, so we're hoping for a little bit of clarity in that space. We do have the ability through our policy settings to also plan for assets that provide for the health, safety and wellbeing of communities but are privately owned. So, for example, we worked to support Ngāti Wheke to plan for their assets as well, but they weren't incorporated into our plan.
Yeah, great. The interpretation of the Coastal Hazards Adaptation Plan, we found that some planning concepts and terminology were not well understood along with what the plan actually does, so what the role and the purpose of the plan is. We will be recruiting an implementation lead in the middle of this year to help support implementation into asset management, which will try and help ensure that the right people are engaged early and understand the expectations around the plan, what it does and doesn't do. And then with coastal panel operations, we're looking at supporting young people, so putting in additional support like pre-meetings or things like that. We found that it was hard to keep young people engaged throughout the process. Again, it's a long time for people to be engaged. So we're working through some options regarding some young people, and we're also going to update our terms of reference to be able to address things like non-attendance, what happens if we do catch-up meetings with members, with panel members that weren't able to attend meetings, things like that. So we're looking at honing in on some of the coastal panel operations, that the coastal panel may also look different depending on where we end up going. So a lot of these lessons learned and the areas of improvement tie in closely with where we're going next. So it will all hopefully come out in the wash. Yeah, so like I say, we're looking to integrate the improvements in the process as appropriate, and yeah, the next adaptation area will determine the relevance of some of the lessons learned. Now we could go into a bit of discussion around what people have, if there's any feedback on the chat process, if you've heard anything out in the community, if you think we missed anything, be good to hear some thoughts.
Oh, Joe said it was good.
Well, here we go.
I mean, yeah, I guess the rest of us haven't been involved at all, but it does sound like it was been very worthwhile. And I do wonder about, although the time, 2 years is a long time, it's also about the time that it takes to kind of really get to know people.
Yeah.
And so maybe the time is although it's a, lots of use of people resource, it might also be essential to getting buy-in, to having enough time at least.
Yeah, I do tend to agree, and it was a criticism we received, and we're taking it on board and seeing what we can do. But ultimately, we are pausing at certain points to get feedback from Runanga, and there is time that needs to be taken there. Some of the delays, involved council processes and making sure everyone's briefed. So there's only a level of efficiency that we can really trim back on there. And I agree, it's because it's quite a complicated and evolving thing. It's not something you can knock off easily with somebody in a quick conversation in an afternoon.
But going forward, it must be alligators, okay?
Yeah.
You're speaking all the time. Yes. So Kelly and then Joe, and we can come back to you if you like.
Yeah, I mean, I've already given some feedback. That I think the process was excellent, the information was fantastic. And my advice about the next area, which I've already shared with you, would be ABC, anywhere but coastal. I think there's plenty of other places to hone your skills and hone the process before you get to what I think would probably be a much more engaged community, and I think you'll be in a much better place to do that piece of work. But I think it's been really good. We've learned a lot of lessons. It's been really interesting to be part of.
Yeah, I've kind of kept everyone updated throughout the process as much as I could, but there were little things that I've suggested throughout the process, and I think it was closer to 3 years.
We paused for COVID, so we
Oh,
appointed the coastal
right.
panel, and then we had to wait, I think, 8 months because we didn't want to have it on Zoom.
Right.
We thought it was really important to have that.
Because I just knew that from last term, I was on the panel from last term, and then into this
Yeah,
term.
that would be the, yeah, there was a delay, and that actually unfortunately was one of the reasons some of the young people dropped off as well.
Yeah.
For that period.
So, like just with people around the table, the asset identification, I think, is one of the big things that we can actually speed the process up with. If the team can come to us with the assets that we need to look at and identify, then you can pre-select, and then the community can add on or take away from that list instead of going through each one and seeing what the community wish to have. And throughout the consultation as well, we found out there were little holes in the consultation, especially for Wall Road residents. So just trying to rectify those little issues.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the challenge there, to be frank, is that they were communicated with quite
Oh.
frequently throughout the process.
Right.
Yeah, so one of our challenges is how do we try and provide materials that people might want to actually open and engage with, because they did have access, there were flyers in their letterbox, they were on the newsletter list. We did actually brief their resident association early on. So from our perspective, we felt we had done quite a lot to bring people along, but it's just how do you get that hook so that people will sort of see that flyer in their letterbox and go, actually, I'm going to act on that and do something about it.
And I think another big lesson that I learned from having issues over here on the coastal compared to what they have over there was not every community is the same with the issues they have. And one of their big concerns, instead of sea level rise, it was hill runoff.
Yeah.
From the frequent rain events.
Yeah.
And I think these additional flooding events which are happening throughout the city, some of those may take priority over gradual stuff instead of intense stuff. So areas that are hit by this flooding, and there's a few of them along our rivers, of course, are probably ones to target.
Long run, yeah.
Right. Tim?
Thank you. I'm just trying to understand the practicality. It's good to have a plan, but is there money to do it?
So two answers to that question. The first is that the back of the plan spelled out the costings, and we've separated that into actions that are needed within 10 years. So for example, the wharf at Port Levy is pretty much at capacity already. So that is something that needs to be invested in within the next decade. So we have more certainty about those ones, and they will go into the next LTP. They'll be bid for, and that implementation lead role that we have put in this, or we're putting in.
When you say capacity, you're talking about the life?
It's the seas here and the wharf is there. It's got not much life left in it.
Yeah.
So we will be supporting the asset managers to make sure that there is proposed funds and that's set aside in the LTP for those 0 to 10 years. Then we've got most of the costs coming into the future, and that triggers for us an intergenerational equity challenge, because it is going to be future generations have to pay for most of that. So we did in the last LTP set up a climate resilience fund, which is about putting funds aside now for locked for 30 years, and then that will be unlocked to help fund some of those medium-term actions that are needed.
And is there enough money in
No.
there? No.
But it's a good start, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no money.
There's going to need to be, ultimately, there's going to need to be reprioritisation in the future as we develop these adaptation pathways. The process allows for, it's very flexible. You choose your preferred pathway, but you retain other options that could still be viable or valid. Because we're planning over 100 years. We don't really know what the world's going to be like in even 30 years' time. So future councils may choose to change the pathways and they may choose to reprioritise some of the funds across the district.
And are you working with Natural Hazards Commission with their meetings and things about the 75% chance next 50 years of the
Alpine Fold. We're not planning for the Alpine Fold. What we do is we plan for coastal hazards, which is coastal flooding, erosion and rising groundwater. What we do is we try to make sure that any adaptation actions do not exacerbate other hazards. So, for example, a theoretical application could be that if we were building a seawall or something, you might look at making sure that it is built to earthquake standards, for example. So, and in the, as Joe would attest to, in the area we were working in, a lot of the roads were very challenging, but as she's mentioned, the slope erosion is a challenge. You've got a road low lying by the sea and you've got a slope right there. You're not going to retreat that road up on that slope because you're trading one hazard for another. So that's the sort of thing we spend a lot of time.
So about 8 years ago, we were talking about retreat, about saying the word retreat. So that's just gone, eh?
Retreat has retreated, what do you mean? we don't.
The council are no longer thinking of retreat.
I think everybody in our sector would say that retreat is remaining on the table as a viable option and a realistic option right around the country and right around the world.
So our coastal hazard catalogue of options, like our adaptation options, a big long list of options of how you can adapt to coastal hazards, which started the conversation with the coastal panel of which ones do we want. That's definitely got over the section on retreat among protect, accommodate, maintain.
Yeah. So we do look at retreat options and we will continue to do so. It's realistic and it has to be discussed. The challenge, as I mentioned before, is that we haven't got a framework from central government yet around essentially who pays.
What are you expecting?
What are we expecting from government? Probably what we're expecting and what we want might be different things. Well, under the last government, there was a proposal that went quite far down the track. They had an expert working group who had developed a proposal which had a staggered approach to different types of property. So a primary place of residence, you might get 100% payout. A rental property, I think it was 80% if you committed to rebuilding that somewhere else, because obviously housing supply in the long term is a concern. They had different methodologies. That went to select committee. There was a change of government. This government has had another select committee inquiry, which has been much higher level. And it's really focused more around sort of principles and approaches. So we're just waiting to see what comes out of MFE later this year with the National Adaptation Framework. Yeah.
The thing that worries me is that us politicians, all politicians that represent areas, when that includes like our whole area is obviously impacted by sea level rise and groundwater rise, etc., is that our incentives are to tell people what they want to hear is that there'll be no change, and that it concerns me that like there's a tour of some people around the country at the moment that's coming to Christchurch who coming to tell us all about how it's all a conspiracy, and I was like, well, I just want to make sure that people get the help that they need. Like at the end of the day, isn't that like if we can all agree on that?
Yeah.
Then we can try and figure out solutions to the problem rather than.
That's right.
Yeah. And if it is a conspiracy, then we don't need to put that plan in place. But if it's sitting there ready, at least we all know what we need to do. Yeah.
I was excited about going to that meeting, and Carolyn said, "No, they're anti, they're nutcases."
I think that's quite a balance.
Okay.
And I think you need to actually hear all sides and listen to those people as well as the information that we're fed.
So I don't think there is stuff that's based on evidence and science, and then there are reckons. I'm not interested in listening to reckons that aren't interacting with science. because I don't want to, like, yeah, I don't want to encourage people fear mongering around the country. We want to make sure that people get the help that they need. Be very clear about that.
And we can agree to disagree on some things.
Of course, but the thing is, we don't know the future. We just have to.
Don't.
We have to model. We have to use the best available evidence.
I mean, my feedback will be this won't be new, but I think that the Pacific Island community has a really powerful voice in this space because many of those communities actually know firsthand what the consequence of climate change, sea level rise, what it means in real terms to them as people. So for me, I think it's really important that we continue to work in that space and look at what we can do to do more. The other thing is, I think it's a bit of a misnomer to say coastal, because actually communities that are not coastal, don't identify as coastal, are actually still really badly impacted by what potentially can happen in the future. And so I just think the way we use that phrase, we just need to think about more about that. But, you know, I've been really impressed with the work that you've done. I know it's taken maybe longer than people would hope, but I do think there's a lesson in working with communities, taking time to talk to people, hear from people, involve people, and just actually telling people what we're going to do. My one concern is that government are going to make some environmental changes. They just announced another set today. I think there's some, I don't know, there may be some stuff around climate change.
There's an piece on natural hazards.
Yeah, so there's some new stuff happening, which seem to kind of, and again, this is not a new point, I think I raised from the start, but for those of us who went through the earthquake and the Royal Commission, there was some pretty clear guidance given around the gaps between the regional policy statement and the local land use plans around hazards. So whether or not there's a better way of dealing with them, I don't know, but with the announcement today, it seems like there will be a new way that we're expected to deal with it possibly.
Joe?
So are you working with tracking against the RCPs, or you is someone else doing that work?
As in terms of which of the IPCC projections is panning out?
Yeah, like which are we kind of taking to?
Well,
we'll probably be more focused on monitoring our signals and triggers that we've got in the plan, which obviously relate to how much we emit. So if we've got signals or triggers around sea level rise or the number of times an asset is flooded, things like that are obviously related to how warm our planet gets. But in terms of tracking and predicting how likely different scenarios are, we'll probably keep looking to MFE and the IPCC.
Okay, so you've got, you're asking for that work on them?
they produce occasional guidance, and the last update to the guidance would have been about a year ago.
Yeah.
Is that localised?
MFE localises it to New Zealand.
Yeah.
Can we do localised tracking? This is what I've talked about for years.
I know, so the monitoring we are going to be doing of the signals and triggers is allowing us to understand when those changes occur. Whether it's realistic to localise the monitoring of the IPCC is something that probably our technical lead would need to talk about, but I suspect actually not. I suspect it's an incredibly difficult thing to do. It's called downscaling, and downscaling the IPCC projections for New Zealand is already a significant process of work. So I don't think we'd be taking that on at a local level. Yeah.
What about the vertical land movement stuff?
So we have
You're doing monitoring on that.
Well, we have some reports on that we've just released. Yeah.
Thank you, ladies.
Are you separate to rubbish dumps?
In what way?
In many ways.
Oh, good.
Do we include rubbish dumps in it? Yes, we do. Yeah, because unfortunately they're often around coastlines.
Oh,
Yeah,
the Bonds Bay was done well.
right.
I'm just wondering, I know it's heaps of.
Yeah. We found out halfway through the process that there used to be a view that was it dilution is the solution. To treating waste, and that's why they put them beside the coastlines, so the water would just wash everything away.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, well, at least because I have always wondered,
Why they were there.
Is it because it was so-called wasteland?
Yeah. No, apparently it was actually deliberate.
All right, well, lovely. All right, any more questions? No,
That's great.
let's go.
Cool. I will pick up and talk about where we might take our adaptation planning next. So we split the remaining area of the district that's exposed to coastal hazards into 4 different areas. We were kind of aiming for areas that were manageable in scale. So an area that we as the CHAP team and a coastal panel of community representatives could work well in, and when we have wider community engagements, kind of making sure that those communities all kind of relate to those areas. We wanted to have similar geographic archetypes in those areas, so trying to make sure that we have whole river catchments in an area. We're not talking about one side of the river without talking about the other side of the river, trying to limit the number of times we split the open coast, those sort of things. We also looked at grouping community groups with existing connections to, again, make sure that they can work well together in a coastal panel setting and during those wider community engagements. And we also looked at the boundaries of other council programs. So primarily the land drainage recovery program has done quite a bit of work in the Lower Avon area and might continue to do that in the Heathcote. And we've also been having quite a few discussions with Plan Change 12, so our planning team, around making sure that any precincts that they might determine through their plan change lines up well with any conversations we're going to be having with communities. We've kind of grouped those areas into 3 different options on where we might be able to go next. So the first one, Waimari to South Shore and the lower inland along the Lower Avon. It's kind of recognising that conversation around a lot of the communities that will be impacted might not see themselves as coastal, even though a lot of that flood risk follows the river. The second option would be the lower Styx area and Banks Peninsula simultaneously. So recognising that there's a relatively lower level of assets exposed in these areas. So we think we might be able to do 2 at the same time. And the third one being Woolston to Taylor's Mistake area. Before I kind of go into a bit more detail on each of those, a bit of a high level overview of the exposure in those different areas. So in the table you can see the roads, 3 water pipes, residential buildings and commercial and industrial buildings that are exposed in those different areas during a 1 in 100 year storm with 40 centimetres of sea level rise. So for example, you can see that in option 1, which is the East Christchurch example, there's 109 kilometres of roads exposed. And then that percentage is how much that is as a percentage of the roads across the district. So 4% of the roads across the district are in that area and are exposed. The colours then show you the relative risk between the different options. So red being this option has the most exposed of that asset grouping, green the least. And at a high level, you can see that option 1 is the most red, so it's got the most exposed out of all the 3 different options. We know that the level of exposure isn't the only thing that's going to be making the decision on where we go next. So we've had a bit of a thought process around what some of the other opportunities and challenges of those different options will be. So starting with option 1, we would adjust the highest level of risk. So from that previous slide, it's got the most assets exposed to coastal hazards over the coming decades. We can also utilise some high quality data and assessments that we don't have in some of the other areas. So that land drainage recovery program that I mentioned briefly has done quite a lot of flood modelling for the Avon River, and we could use that in our work. We could also pick up the work that they've done on option analysis for river flood management in that area and start talking to communities about that. We can also align conversations with PC12 because this is an area where that will have a lot of impact. And there's also some opportunities for if we form a basis on the protection that the dunes currently offer. If we form the basis of a long-term strategy on that to kind of implement those early, there's some opportunities to be had about implementing plantings early, and kind of the longer lead in time you give to natural options, the more benefit they'll have over the long term. Some challenges we see, it's a large scale and more complex to what we've dealt with in Whakaroa and Kokararata. So way more densely developed area rather than the kind of discrete bays that we have dealt with. It's also a harder public-private split. So we've talked a little bit about our scope is limited to planning for public assets and those that contribute to the health, safety and wellbeing of communities. And in an area like this, more developed, those assets become more intertwined. And so it's harder to provide clarity on what might happen to private assets while we're talking about adapting public infrastructure. And any delay of that central government direction on roles and responsibilities and funding mechanisms kind of makes that a challenging conversation to have with communities. We've also heard last time when we talked about where we should start adaptation planning, we heard that these communities might not be ready to have an adaptation planning conversation until after the earthquake legacy issues have been fully addressed. And some of those are still kind of in the works. So that's another challenge. With option 2, opportunity, like I mentioned before, I think we might be able to do 2 areas at once just due to the lower level of exposure. We could also complete Banks Peninsula with quite a similar approach as what we took in Whakaropa and Kokorarata, so kind of continuity of approach could be an opportunity there. We could support some ongoing adaptation work that Onuku is undertaking, and we have a existing relationship with Te Runanga or Kokorarata. The central government direction that we've been talking a little bit about is likely to have less of an impact in these areas, again, just because there's less private assets. And so if that kind of lands halfway through the process, it's less likely to have as much of an impact. And we've also heard that particularly the Banks Peninsula community is quite ready and willing to engage in our program. Some challenges in these areas, again, there's elements that we haven't dealt with before, as probably in all of the areas, particularly the tourism impacts around Akaroa and also the high dependence on Waka Kotahi kind of coming to the table and keen to talk about adaptation planning options. There might be a bit of a perception if we go to these areas that we're avoiding the most at-risk areas, of avoiding planning with communities where that impact will hit the most. Also a bit of a crossover with ECAN in that lower Styx area in regards to the Waimakariri stop banks. And there's also some existing challenging relationships between council and the Brooklands community in particular. Option 3, opportunity to address the second highest level of risk, and have also heard that some of those communities are willing and ready to engage with us, which is good. Some challenges, again, large scale and complex, that central government legislation and direction having more of an impact here again. The land drainage recovery program may provide additional multi-hazard modelling for the lower Heathcote in the coming years, which it might be good for us to wait for that to ensure any alignment and we can kind of benefit of any modelling that they do through their work. There's also existing built structures along most of this coastline, which offer some level of protection against coastal hazards at the moment. And so it kind of reduces the immediate need to plan in this area. We've talked about this a little bit as well, but we're aware that a lot of these options, we might have to undertake adaptation planning differently. So Jane mentioned we've to date made adaptation pathways for assets. So we've got one for Teddington Road, Allendale Hall, the wastewater pipes in Charters Bay, super specific in location. When we move to an area such as East Christchurch, this will probably have to look different. It's just not feasible. It would take 15 years to do that. And so kind of starting to think about, could we take a by network approach? Could all the roads that feed into the same arterial road have the same approach? Because it's not really, would it be realistic to protect one, raise the other, reduce the level of service on another? It's probably, we can look at the area more holistically and kind of see what the direction for this area might be. We could also look at whole geographic areas, regardless of what asset class assets within that area fall into. So we could, for example, start looking at the dunes, about dune management into the future. Do we want to allow space for them? Do we want to increase the planting? And then we could look at the river corridor, talk about river flood management, what are the options there, and then kind of move into the low-lying areas that are left after that. Or we could also we'll probably still also do asset-specific pathways for our supercritical high priority assets. So the ones that we know communities really rely on, and those will probably still have their own individual pathways. There we are. In terms of next steps and where to from here, in the immediate next step, we're keen if you have any thoughts on the options that we presented, and if you're aware of any community groups in any of these areas that are focused on adaptation planning at the moment that might want to have conversations with us. We'll then continue to socialise these options with wider council teams, community boards, and other stakeholders to make sure that we're aligning with all other programs and work that's going on as best as we can. We're talking to a couple of other community boards next month, and then looking to line up an ELT briefing and possibly a council workshop, and then we'll seek a council decision after that, either late this year or early next year.
All right, Jo?
Yeah, I noticed when you showed the roading and pipe assets and everything, you didn't have all of the facilities and everything. Is that going to be separated out?
Was that in the table?
In the table, yeah.
Yeah, that was just for a super high level, quick look, because obviously there's more pipes and roads than community facilities.
Because I noticed
totally know there's other assets.
The Widge Ponds and the wastewater treatment plant and the dump and QE2 and parks and toilets and everything, so it's huge.
Yeah.
So that's just concerning me that it is so huge.
Yeah.
And that there's a lot of things to consider, especially we took so long going through the process and we did with those little ones.
Yeah.
That's where that rolling things up into by asset type could help us move a bit faster.
Yeah, so not talking as much about the water drinking pipes that maybe communities, they want drinking water, but they don't necessarily care how. So rolling up those ones that communities care less about into those having more conversations about the big ones.
A lot of the roads that, like you said about the earthquake legacy stuff, some of those roads are still affected by earthquake legacy issues that need to be sorted out. So it's a where do you start, where do you stop? And the other thing that you mentioned about the dunes, but I think the dunes are probably maybe the less important part of the whole solution. It's next to the river and the issues that we're getting from the riverside, because the dunes have got a lot of protection there at the moment and they're accreting at a really amazing rate. Jane's looking like no.
They are at the moment. I guess the challenge, and this is something we need to look into, is what's going to happen when we have more frequent and severe storms, and they are cut away more frequently. And I'm not the right person to be talking about that, so we can bring Tom Simon-Smith to come in and talk about it once we've got a little bit more information. But it is. But
even like in relation to the coastal hazards tool online, it actually shows that they're going to be there for quite a long time and have a good defence for a long time, whereas on the riverside we haven't.
Yeah, I guess it's regardless of what order we talk about those things, and we're still going to have a conversation about the dunes, and it might be a bit of a nice way into it, if that makes sense, like gentle conversation. We all appreciate that the dunes are accreting. We value them for the protection they give us. We want this to continue into the future, and then kind of talk about how can we, get these benefits in other areas as well.
So would it be worth breaking that area down into smaller increments?
Yeah,
so concentrate on, okay, this is south, this is north, this is over towards Bromley Way.
Yeah, so how in Whakakarata we had our priority adaptation locations. So we didn't just look at the whole harbour, we kind of broke it down into those different areas. We're definitely still planning on doing that, and no matter what area we go in, kind of having precincts, sub areas, whatever we end up calling them, of smaller areas within those, and kind of working out what options we have for those. Because you're not going to have the same options for the open coast side of the river as the estuary side. Yeah, so definitely split those up.
There's no area, there's no area that you've identified that doesn't have significant challenges, obviously. I guess I'm tempted to say that I think that going with the two areas, the split area, is probably the most, what's the word? If we're still refining the process, that we're going to go about it, it might be good to do that. However, I do worry that we're delaying doing the work in the areas which affects the most people. And it's going to be hard no matter when we do it. It might be easier when we've, in a few years' time, when there's been a few more storms and things, who knows? I don't know. I feel like I need to know more about the challenges before I feel like I can form a view. My view is that we shouldn't delay doing it if we're ready to. And if we are ready to do it, then we should do the area where the most risk. So, including the southern, what do you call it, the Sumner and that, and Woolston. If we're ready to do that, but if we're not, then maybe a smaller area.
I think, we are part of a network called the Aotearoa Climate Adaptation Network, so we work very closely with other local government practitioners all around the country. In fact, we're going to do a road trip down to Dunedin to talk to them about the South D stuff, and we talk frequently to Thames Coromandel and other parts of the country. So we all share how we go about doing this work. So while we haven't worked in a large area yet, we're very confident that we can absolutely deliver on it. We just want to do that, run that mock process initially, just make sure that we're not kind of, that we've got a very good sense of what we're trying to achieve out of it. So I do think that we are absolutely in the game for being able to move into the East Christchurch space if needed.
Yes. Any other questions or thoughts on options?
So the whole process, how many years do you think it'll take?
For the whole district. So I don't want to alarm you, but we've started in Whakaropa with areas that are at risk within 30 years. There's a likelihood that we'll have to go back around that area into the future. I mean, it's not going to be, so what the IPCC have said is that the sea levels will rise for centuries, if not millennia.
So it's a living document, eh? So you're spending time.
Continually will need to be reassessed. The monitoring will need to continue. We'll need to look at additional new risks as we understand them. Yeah.
But to make plans for those other 4 areas, probably another 8 to 10 years.
Yeah.
Less to do with money, eh?
Pardon?
Less to do with budget.
And
No,
that
no.
co-creation
Yeah.
process with communities, kind of taking them on that journey. Like I said, it takes time to build
But
those
if you had the money
relationships.
in a big enough team, you could do that 3 at the same time, couldn't you?
It's sort of an iterative process, because if we went out and said this is how we're planning to do it, predetermine some outcomes, then that would probably be quite a quick process. The community might not like it though. So what we do is we do get feedback, we then reassess, we do a lot of work kind of in-house, and then we bring it out again. So short-circuiting that would be a change to transparency and public participation. Those are the main risks for speeding up. And so, I guess our view is that the transparency and public participation elements are what gives it legitimacy, but also they take time. So that's kind of the balance there. Yeah.
What's the controversy that, if there is actually controversy about what happened at Carpeting?
That was about plan change, I think.
Oh, so having stuff on limbs and
And
Yeah.
okay.
and rolls, and limbs, yeah.
Oh yeah,
They took them to the high court, didn't they? And they won, and so they had to be taken off the list.
because that suggests it's a bad process. That
Yeah, probably.
yeah,
I was really
and,
surprised.
and that's the thing, like really good process, and taking as many people as we can.
Critical.
It's
I
like,
don't think they told them. I think they just put them on. Did they? I don't know.
I can't quite remember.
I know.
It was a few years ago.
Yeah, it's been an ongoing challenge there, I think. Yeah,
But you think legally you have to put them on there.
we do. We're required to.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's changes to the Lagoima now, which are actually going to drive a lot more of that too. So we're required to, all councils are now required to comply with the 1 July deadline for getting all of our information on limbs. We're actually pretty well set up in Christchurch, but I think some councils, maybe they haven't had some of those big hazard assessments in the past. So
No,
they're now being required to put things like third-party reports on and so on. So
it's all digitalised now, isn't it? So it's quicker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, anything else?
Yeah. Just following on from that, because we've had a request from South Shore to remove the erosion aspect of their limbs. And, there's evidence here to show that their dunes and everything have increased over the years, but how do they get around something like that?
the limbs are, the scenario that's used for the limb is looking forward into the future. And it signals that, I think it was a 1 metre sea level rise, that with 1 metre sea level rise, there will be risks to coastal flooding and erosion if it goes onto limbs. So perhaps at the moment, the people are not observing changes in themselves, but over time, there is modelling that shows that they're likely to see some changes, and that's why it's on the limbs at the moment.
And that limb is based on our coastal hazard assessment, which, while it took into those SAM budget reports, it models the short-term effects of storms as well. So the SAM budget reports also recognise that, yes, they're accreting over the long term, but short-term storms can still accrete and remove sand. And so that's why that risk is still there. It also, that SAM budget report also says, yes, they'll accrete, expected to accrete until at least 2120, unless we follow that RCP 8.5 or higher. So again,
I
there is
think
still that
their
risk.
view was that there's their property won't even probably be around in 100 years, or their home, their asset, it would have deteriorated to.
I think the thing with limbs is it's about the buyer as well. So if it wasn't on the limb, and someone buys that property, then they would want to know about their risk. Yeah. So
It's like pre-earthquake liquefaction probability.
yeah.
But who cares about that?
Yeah. And then we suddenly did, right?
Is that a one?
Yeah, it was. It was, I mean, massively understated because it was assumed it was going to be at the up1 fault, right?
Yeah.
But, Kelly?
Yeah, so I was just reading the Cabinet case, and it was the legal matter was in 2012, because the council had added predicted 50 and 100-year floodlines on the limbs of 1,800 properties. The council won, but they then took them out because they thought that the basis of the science, the scientific grounds were safe, were shaky. So I guess, in this case, science has come a long way in the last 12 years, so we're getting much better prediction.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to ask you, what's on limbs in regard to these sorts of
Coastal hazards.
that you're aware of?
So there was a 2017 Tonkin and Taylor report, which none of us were around for, and that put notations on for flood and erosion risk at that point in time, around about 13,000 properties-ish from memory. And we did our 2021 coastal hazards assessment. And as part of that process, I think we updated around about the same amount of limbs. And what we did is, for some people, we added for the first time flood or erosion risk. For some people, we removed flood or erosion risk because the modelling had shown that the scenario had changed. And for some people, they retained flood or erosion risk. So it's around about to remember the data, it's about 16% of properties in the district have limb notation for coastal hazards, about 38% for river flooding.
Have there been any legal challenges that you're aware of?
Yeah, and I just want to point out, because something that does come up a lot is, my house, and I know better in my house, the slope erosion risks for the Port Hills, it's applied across the whole Port Hills. So I live up in Huntsbury, and we get a general limb notation for rock roll, mass movement, and slope instability. So it's not known on my property, but it's a general one right across the area. So these sorts of approaches are getting quite common now, where we take neighbourhood level information and apply it, because people do need that when they're buying a property.
Same with floodplain,
All right, cool. Well, thank you very much. I'm sure this is we've got plenty more
Conversations
time,
to be had.
conversations to be had. And I think, I mean, despite all our different concerns, I think we all just want to make sure that people do get the information and the help that they need.
Makes you want to run for a committee board again, eh? So you can stay in touch.
You've already dialed out, mate. Too late. Sorry, I think Yanni, who hasn't said much, and then Joe.
I'm gonna still just reiterate the concern around the government process, our process, the plan change process, this process. I still feel sort of disconnected.
And
I'm
what,
just worried we can spend a lot of time and effort doing this, but yeah, if the planning framework changes significantly, where do we get left to?
for our process, only some of our actions relate to plan changes. So the plan change is travelling alongside us, and we are working, I can assure you, we're working very closely together. Poor Chris keeps getting dragged into bunches of meetings about it. But only some of the actions that come out of adaptation plans relate to plan changes, and they would occur, we have the mechanisms to do those now, so.
Sorry, what I mean is that if government changed the planning laws and say basically you're going to prohibit activity or development on these areas and the XYZ, then ultimately the conversation that we've had could be very different.
I mean, that's always a risk with anything, isn't it? That there's going to be a change in direction.
Well, that happened with these buildings.
So has Ministry for the Environment given any feedback around what's happening?
Well, there's the MP's Natural Hazards was released today,
Yeah.
so we haven't really had a chance to absorb it yet, but that is, I believe, intended to give direction to councils to do risk-based planning and to take the kinds of approaches that we are progressing with. I mean, yeah, we talked to MFA that we're all in the same direction. It's just the tools and mechanisms and timing of the delivery of those. That's,
Where did we get to with regional council? Are they still doing any hazard work? Like they were supposed to have a hazard strategy.
I believe they put the RPS on hold at the moment.
They supported us with some of the vertical lane movement.
Yes, they support us with the science side of things a lot, yeah. Yeah. And they are doing some work as a region to help some of the smaller TAs to set up adaptation planning processes. So we do work in with them and share tools and support ideas.
All right, I think Joe might have.
Yeah, I was just gonna, is it working?
Yep.
I
Oh,
was gonna make a suggestion. Can we share the video of this with our communities and get their feedback as to what they think would be the best area to.
it's online.
First?
It'll be online, so yeah.
Yeah, but can we share that
You mean it?
as a board? Can we share that to our communities?
So are you just asking us as individual to share it on?
Well, asking if Cindy can actually distribute it to our contact mailing list, like Spencerville and Brooklands and all of those people.
I mean, we can.
Yeah.
Just because I think they should be.
But we do that anyway when we're sending out our agendas, like it's sent out, but is that the sort of feedback you're looking for, Jane?
I guess as representatives of communities at the moment, we're trying to engage with you guys. I mean, it's we've got a few other community boards to talk to. I don't know that they'll be following that process. So it might be a bit uneven, but if you do hear though, I mean, it's great for us to know if you are hearing back from this presentation from the community. Pass
It's quite valuable for them to hear it.
Yeah.
If they can understand it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's very early on in the process. We definitely want people to engage with it, but
yeah, I'm not sure at this point this is really set up for a public facing.
No, if we just read it,
conversation.
we wouldn't have the information, understanding as you guys here.
Yeah, we are just to reassure you as well, we are planning a lot of, as I said before, pre-engagement, trying to build that understanding in the community. So one of the things we've got planned is that with the Bowie seminar coming up in July, that the coastal panel from, or some representatives of the coastal panel from Whakaropa will do a presentation. So transferring the conversation community to community, and it might be actually more valuable for them to engage with that conversation. So great if you promoted that event. Yeah.
well, cool. Thank you, you three. Yeah, appreciate it. It's just an unrelated matter. Are we? I was just going to finish the meeting.
Yeah, I was just going to butt in before you did finish the in terms of the briefing that we didn't have on the Marahau Burwood roundabout improvements, I've just sent an email to everybody. I just wanted to raise or float the idea that if people are okay with it, maybe that the staff, we're going to do briefing could send us out something so that we wouldn't slow down the process, because the consultation is supposed to start next Friday.
Cindy?
So I got your email, thank you, Kelly. So the first thing I'll do tomorrow, because the project manager is unwell at the moment.
Yeah.
I will speak to the manager to see if the presentation that they had prepared can be shared with the board. You've got the cover report, which was on the agenda, so that's half of the information, I suppose. So I'll seek clarification from his outline tomorrow if I can share that, and if there's anything else that they can share before consultation is scheduled to go live next week. And I'll also confirm if consultation will still be going ahead, noting that the board haven't had that item yet. So as soon as I've got some information, I will let the board as a whole know.
Sounds good.
Yeah, because if the board actually want to, after seeing it, want a briefing, I'm happy with that. If it delays the consultation.
Thank you, it was great.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much.
It has been a long.
Yep, that's for sure. All right.
I'm happy to take me bucket.
All right, kara kia whakamuta. Kia tau, māri e, o te rangi I tu I honei, o papa tuanuku I tapu tonei, o te taiao I awhine, ki runga I a tātou, tihei mauri ora.
Yeah, I'm struggling with it.
You'll get it.
No, no.